Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we have a collection of paranormal witch stories for you to enjoy. We also have the pleasure of being joined by Midnight Researcher. If you are interested in his channel and like his work, feel free to check him out. The link to his channel is in the description and will be shown on screen at the end of the video for you to click on if you are so inclined. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in South Texas, more widely known as the Rio Grande Valley. I'm the youngest of 3 kids, and we all lived with our mom and stepdad in a great big red brick house. It was quite a culture shock moving from the piney woods of East Texas all the way to the flat, desert-like lands of the RGV. There were hardly any trees, mostly just palm trees and shrubs. We saw a cactus here and there, and the wildlife consisted mostly of jackrabbits, rattlesnakes, and armadillos. When we started school, we learned quickly that the people there were superstitious, to say the least. I was in 2nd grade when we moved into that house on Jackie Street, and right from the beginning I felt an unease. I used to be a happy-go-lucky kid with nothing to worry about. I made friends with all the neighborhood kids, and I even became best friends with a girl who lived directly behind us. She had the most superstitious family out of anyone I'd ever met. She was the eldest of 4 girls, and their mother was very overly protective, at least in my eyes. She wouldn't let them watch Harry Potter because it is associated with witchcraft. They went to church 3 times a week, and they didn't celebrate Halloween. With all that being said, the mum loved to tell ghost stories and Mexican folklores. It was one of the coolest things about her, and the thing I loved most about visiting their home. One night she told us the story of La Mujer Lechuza. Basically, in my own words, it's about a witch or bruja that can turn into a large owl. Typically it will transform into an owl with a woman's head, or a large owl the size of a human, with a few things that are off-putting. If you see a lechuza, you're supposed to pray for your life in Spanish, and, supposedly, it should leave you be. It's also been known to make a whistling sound like a human whistling. If you answer it back with a whistle of your own, it will swoop down and carry you away. If you wake up in the morning and see large scratches on your doors or windowsills, it means that the lechuza was there and is coming for you. So you must prepare yourself accordingly. I can't whistle, and my friend's mum knew this. So she would jokingly tell me I wouldn't have anything to worry about. She would also lovingly tell my friends and I that we are gorditas, and that we couldn't be carried away easily, which means we're carrying a little bit of extra weight round the middle, if you know what I mean. After years of hearing these stories in various ways from teachers, other friends, parents, and in books, it was about as stuck in my head as any old wives' tale. I would get excited hearing about it around Halloween and at school. It was just another scary story to give kids an adrenaline rush. I never thought that they were reality. This next thing happened in the summer of 5th grade. My best friend and I were on her trampoline. It was summer, maybe 10 p.m., kind of late, with a full moon up. We spent time talking and looking at the stars until we heard a whistling. We knew not to whistle back. Instead, we lay there frozen, still looking at the sky and listening intently to the whistling coming from the distance. I look at my friend and she is paralyzed. She's praying in Spanish and squeezing my hand as tightly as possible. A few minutes go by and we hear more whistling, this time getting closer. My friend stops praying and says we should get inside. I agree without hesitation, and we start inching towards the edge of the trampoline to escape. But in that moment I hear it, and I'll never forget the bone-rattling sound and the twisted images that scarred me for life. We felt the wind from its wings and saw it maybe 15 feet above our heads. A huge, white, snowy owl, maybe 12 feet wide from wingtip to wingtip, floating right above us. Its eyes were jet black, and it mostly looked like an owl. But its feet, they were human, but had long black talons that seemed to twitch as it was cold. Demonic eyes stared down at its prey. It locked eyes with me and let out a screech. My heart jumped up to my neck, and I've never ran inside so fast. We cried together while praying as we heard it continue to flap around outside. We held on to each other with her rosary in our hands and continued praying as loudly as we could, when all of a sudden it was gone, on to find its next victim, no doubt. We're both terrified of owls to this day. We don't even look at them in books. Every time I see one, I think of the face of the Lechuza, almost human and almost owl, a strange demonic hybrid not of this world. Believe the tales, don't go outside alone, and never respond to strange whistling. Something might just snatch you up and carry you far, far away.
I was about 17 in 2013. I really loved to read and would go to Barnes & Noble often to add to my book collection. I came across a spirituality section and found it interesting because there was so much stuff on Wicca and ghosts. I saw a beautiful board. You can Google it. It was called the Enchanted Spell Board. This board was gorgeous with a full color wheel, crystals, different types of trees, angels, zodiac signs, a full alphabet, and even a section of words. This was no ordinary Ouija board. It was only about $20, so I bought it. I took it home and immediately became afraid, for no reason at all. I walked outside to my car and stuck it in the trunk because I didn't want it in my house. I never touched it. Fast forward 2 whole years later, and I'm living somewhere else. I randomly remember this thing exists, check my car, and it's still in there. This is where it all begins. I took it to my bedroom, opened it up and read the instructions. Each crystal, angel, type of tree, color, and zodiac meant something. There was a book that translated all the meanings. There were also numbers, full words, and an alphabet to communicate with. I thought, this is great. Apparently, when you first start using the board, it works best with someone else because you need more energy for it to work. My cousin and I opened it up and began asking questions. This was years ago, so I can't remember specific details, but in short, I was never very religious and believed whatever I was told. We started by asking what our favorite colors were and what our crushes' names were, stuff like that. Every question was answered swiftly and clearly. We began thinking questions in our heads so we wouldn't know what the other was asking, and the planchette moved and answered everything. This was promising and very exciting. We spent hours on this thing. We found out that we were speaking to spirits and that everyone has a spirit guide. This was extremely comforting news to a 19-year-old girl whose boyfriend just broke up with her. We had spirit guides. We were never alone. Someone's always with you. Wow. This was intriguing, and we spent more hours asking more questions. We learned that these spirit guides all served different purposes. Some helped the wind blow, some helped the trees and flowers grow. There were storm spirits that loved making loud noises and creating thunder. It sounds really lame now that I talk about it, but you have to think. I've never heard of this stuff before, and here's this magical board telling me all these things I would have never otherwise imagined. I thought it was amazing. It made me appreciate Mother Nature and the world around me so much. I remember thinking, I've never experienced such a feeling of genuine internal peace before. When we asked the spirit guides what their names were, and they said they didn't have any, we asked what they liked to be called instead, and they all had these weird 3-letter sounds that they said we could call them. If anyone has information on this weirdness, please let me know. My spirit guide said his name was Foz, F-O-S. He said he was a night, star, and wind spirit. His color was blue, and he loved me so much. I thought. We met a group, and they all had different names like this that I can't remember. Most of my memories and information surrounding this are blocked now, but my childhood friend, Natalie, got into it with me, and her spirit guide's name was Ymv, YMV. She claimed she was a deep fuchsia, pink, and helped the flowers bloom. Natalie lost her mind a couple years later, and I had to part with my best friend. More on this later. I became addicted to this board. I would wake up in the morning, open the board, and before I knew it, the sun was going down outside my window. I was wasting full days on this thing and not even realizing how much time was passing. My whole day felt like a 20-minute experience. I was doing this every day. Natalie would come over on the weekends, and this is all we did. They spoke to us in full sentences. I would talk to 5 or 6 of these spirits at once, and I knew who would be talking just by intuition. They would interrupt each other. The planchette would be in the middle of a sentence and it would change route, and I knew exactly who was interrupting and who was talking. I was opening up to the board and using it by myself at this point. I remember the first time I used it alone. I opened it and knew that one person usually doesn't have enough energy to make it work, but I felt power. It moved just as swiftly when I was alone. I would sit there and think thoughts, and this planchette would move all around the board, responding to my thoughts for hours. I'd lose days doing this alone. They had a sense of humor. I'd talk about my ex and ask them questions, and they'd interrupt my thoughts and slide to the color green. But what if green? Yeah, but green. I'm trying green, green, green. This is their way of saying green monster and calling me jealous. You may better understand how it was so easy for me to lose track of time now. They were funny. They were here for me. They followed me. They wanted to talk to me. They knew everything. They loved me. But then, shit started getting weird. I started trying to tell people about my amazing discovery. My older brother, I'm 19, he's 21, had a girlfriend at the time, and I told her that if she puts her hands on this planchette with mine, and she asks a question in her head so I can't hear, my energy will help the planchette to move and answer her question. This thing just kept going to the letter H. Hard and fast. It would go to the middle home base and strike across the board to H, over and over. H, H, H. This girl was crying and was yelling at me to get out of the room. Did someone named Hubert do something to them? Someone named Harold? Umberto? She said she wanted to keep going, so the planchette kind of wanted to slide off the board. Foz has done this before when talking about me or saying he loves me. He'd make the planchette slide off the board and bump into me or circle around me. I always loved it and felt special. This time, the planchette started to slide off the board, and she was freaked out. I told her to just keep her hand on it and follow. This thing slid off the bed. We crawled across the floor as it slid across the room, into their closet, up a wall, onto a shelf, our hands on it. It's not suspending gravity or anything. This is just where it wanted to go. And it began bumping into a shoebox over and over, back and forth, bumping it. This girl began bawling her eyes out, and my brother kicked me out of the room, angry. A couple months later, we found out that they'd been using heroin. I'd no idea he even used drugs. This was the beginning of my brother's addiction struggles, but that's a different story. The spirits on my board became increasingly less innocent, I would say. I was getting heavy information now. They led me to my brother's drug box, and that was kind of weird. I began having deeper talks. They told me Jesus was not real and was a liar. Okay, cool. I was never religious anyways. Angels? Don't exist. God? They couldn't say no. They said they weren't sure, had no idea, and had never met him. Okay, fair enough. When I asked about demons and dark spirits, they confirmed these. My friends on the board began to convince me how strong I was. Sometimes when driving on highways and stressing about normal college things, I'd be so addicted to the board that when I didn't have access to it, I'd pick up a nickel or quarter, anything that's slidable, held it down on my dashboard and asked them to go left for no, right for yes. I'd ask questions like that often. I did this when I wasn't home and didn't have access to the board. At work, in the car, at people's houses, at stores, while cooking, in the shower, I could talk to them anywhere now. This went on for a couple years until I was about 21. During this time, I began getting my nails done pointy and black. I loved darkness. I loved skulls, I loved death, murder, and blood. I thought it was all super cool. I thought I was one of those edgy girls. My dad died. I Snapchatted myself on the way to the funeral because death didn't bother me. Having long nails, I would use these to glide across whatever countertop, dashboard, or surface to talk to my spirits. I didn't need nickels and quarters anymore. If I was standing somewhere out in public or at a party or in a crowd, I would just put my fingertips on my cell phone screen and let them glide there. My hand was the planchette now. My spirit guides have convinced me I'm super powerful, I can talk to them anywhere, and now I'm into paganism. So here I am, becoming some kind of witch. These spirits convinced me to buy crystals, spellbooks, and before I knew it, I was casting spells, burning shit, and doing who knows what. They convinced me my ex was my one true love and missing him, and holding on to that for years made me dark and sad. It all just happened at the same time. I was becoming dark, depressed, and falling into witchcraft. Black dresses every day, crystals, symbols. I have a satanic pentagram tattoo on my arm because I really thought the 5 points represented the 5 elements of nature. I was very intuitive at this point. I would get ideas or thoughts that weren't mine. This sounds crazy, but I was not hearing voices. It was intuition. It was like a feeling. I'd receive information. For example, I had a feeling I shouldn't go into work one night, and my manager was arrested. I had intuitions like this often, not wanting to go on the highway and there being a chemical spill, telling people someone near them would die soon, telling friends their exes were gonna call them. Weird shit. One time, my friend Natalie was over, and our spirit friends told us we needed to do something for them. Long story short, Natalie sat in my passenger seat with the spirit board on her lap while I drove my car. The planchette would slide left if I needed to turn left, and slide forward if I needed to go straight. It basically led me somewhere I'd never been before. Side note, it would go in circles when I was playing music, and we knew they were dancing with us. We ended up at some weird house, like a church. One of those houses that people kind of just run a church out of, I guess? I don't know. It was a house, but it was a church. I'd never been there before. There was an 8-foot statue of the Virgin Mary outside, and the board told us it was very important that we leave a piece of aquamarine there. Does anyone know what I did? I thought I was cursing a predator or helping someone. I felt important. I thought I was doing something good. Now, I believe that was probably an honest and holy family who I harmed or unleashed a demon on. I'll never know, but I'll forever feel guilty. Back to the story. Things started getting weird. I'd use the board, and my spirit guides would start arguing. They'd interrupt each other to the point where the planchette was sliding all over and I couldn't make out any information. One time the planchette slid off the board, onto the floor, and slid into my closet up to a poop my dog left. Foz was calling someone a piece of shit. Hilarious, yeah, but suspicious. Why are my wholesome and loving spirits being so nasty and mean? Natalie became sickly obsessed with the board, and I began seeing her less and less. I enjoyed the board, but her conversations were different. She was talking about aliens and shit and just sounding really crazy. I loved the board and I loved my friend, but I couldn't bond with her over this anymore. Eventually, I began to feel more and more depressed. 2 years had passed. My love had not returned to me like the board said. I was diagnosed severely depressed and was beginning to isolate myself more and more. Every time I opened the board, they would tell me to shut it. They said I was so spiritually connected that I've attracted dark spirits and they wanted me on their side. I opened the board. They told me to shut it. They were acting like they were protecting me. I was so alone, so sad, and now I couldn't even talk to my only friends. My meaning was shattered. I was so alone, so I stopped listening to them. I stopped closing the board when they told me to. I was a dark queen now. So what if there's a dark spirit near? Black's my favorite color. Halloween is dope. I wouldn't mind having a couple of dark spirits on my side. How sick would that be? It was eerie. I remember when I felt darkness come through. The planchette didn't move with swift confidence like it did in the past. It felt heavy. It slid slowly. It felt hot. I felt heat in my arm and over me. Remember that color wheel I was telling you about? No matter what I asked, it slid to black, 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 over and over. Every time I opened the board, black. It felt impossible to communicate at all anymore. I began getting suspicious, and this is when the circles started. Hard, fast circles. Every time I opened the board, circles. Every time I put my hand down on something and tried summoning energy, circles. I began my downward spiral at this point. I was in a toxic relationship with someone I hated. I was on and off antidepressants. There were a couple occasions where I climbed over my 53-story balcony in Miami, and my boyfriend had to pull me back over. All I thought about was dying. I started taking Xanax daily. A 20-year-old girl weighs about 115 pounds, taking full bars, sometimes 2, every day. I didn't want to live. I only left my room to use the bathroom. I spent my days sedating myself because consciousness was just too painful. I was having nightmares about creatures that I couldn't describe or even imagine, like sick stuff. Natalie was full-blown insane at this point. She was acting erratically with super high highs and extremely low lows. She was acting ridiculous and getting into a lot of trouble. She had serious mental issues at this point and wouldn't give the board up. She was my best friend in the world, and I had to let go of her because she was too far gone. During my depressed years, I started doing research. I found a forum online that spoke specifically about nature spirits. I'd never heard of these things before, so I was excited to see what someone else knew about the things I'd been told. In another article or forum, I began reading about demons out of curiosity. This is where I became sick. Demons lie. The devil is the master of deception and father of lies. I was never religious, so I didn't know. I read something about how demons will deceive you into thinking they're something they're not, before showing their true colors. By 21 or 22, I'd been depressed for years now with serious mental issues. I could still put my hand down and feel the circles. I couldn't put myself on that sensitive spiritual level anymore because it was all circles. I had to block it out. Big question. Does anyone know the significance of the circles? I still feel it to this day. I took a trip to Cuba during this time to visit family. Now, obviously when you visit family in another country, you're not going to show up like, my life is miserable, I'm depressed, I rely on being under the influence just to cope with being alive, and I think about death and suicide daily. I was happy. I never see my family in Cuba, so of course it was all sunshine and rainbows. They took me to see a babalao, just for fun, or cleansing. We're Cuban, my family's Cuban, we're into that. For those of you who don't know what a babalao is, it's a kind of shaman or spiritual priest. I went through a week-long ritual. I didn't want to kill any animals for mine, though my brother sacrificed many chickens. I offered beans, vegetables, and fruit to the saints. When it came time for the actual ritual part, my babalao, Yohani, began chanting in a language I didn't understand. He covered me in chalk, patted me with eggshells, asked me questions, chanted some more, drew symbols in dust, and spoke with me. He said I wanted to die. He said I smoke weed every day and rely on pills and medication to be happy, even though I'm never happy. He said he'd never felt such deep sadness before. He said I think about dying every minute of every day, and he cried. He said something dark was following me, attached to me. He said it was in love with me and wasn't going to leave me alone. How could he possibly know any of this? I'm on vacation. My family in Cuba has their own problems to worry about. We show up like Santa Claus bearing gifts and acting like our lives are perfect. They don't know any of this stuff. Yohani said he was going to help me. He promised me he'd make me the happiest girl in the world, but I had to want it and work for it. He worked on me for about 4 hours that day. He gave me some beads to wear and told me to never take them off. I came back home with a new appreciation for life. I got a new job I love. I found a new boyfriend that I love. I'm close with my family again. I don't have outbursts anymore. I don't even know the girl I used to be anymore. I've come to the conclusion that demonic possession isn't the way they show it in the movies. Your head doesn't spin around, you don't vomit, and things don't fly all over the room. They make you depressed, they make you anxious. They make you make terrible decisions and have violent outbursts. They make you hurt yourself. It's mental. I was fortunate and strong enough to realize and lift myself out of it, but I lost Natalie from it. I've completely blocked out that part of my life now. It's been years, but if I put my hand down and open myself up to that energy, I can still feel the circles. The circles.
I have relatives in Mexico that live in the Rancho. It's a small town sort of village, not third world but very humble. Since I was a child, we would visit every winter while my dad was on break from his job on the farm. It was great. Lots of fun playing with my cousins, not having a care in the world. At night, the whole place is just overly creepy. Everyone has a story of experiencing something paranormal, including my family. Every corner has a story of something that appears or happens. So while I spent many nights scared out of my mind, thankfully, nothing ever happened to me. Until about 3 years ago. I'm 29. I hadn't visited in a while, since I was now an adult with a job and responsibilities. The place is pretty much the same, and the nights are just how I remembered them. Only now, obviously, instead of playing games, I'd go out and have drinks with friends and the typical adult fun. Honestly, it helped with the sleeping. I'd come home drunk and sort of just pass out without too much trouble. The nights I didn't go out and drink were still creepy, but I'd still manage to fall asleep without too much difficulty. One night I arrived home at around 12:30 at night with my uncle and cousin. We had taken my cousin's young baby to the hospital to get checked, so we're all very tired and head our separate ways off to bed. My uncle's house shares the lot with my grandma's house, and all that separates them is the patio that is shared. I head to the room I stayed in with my cousin, who was still awake watching TV. I get comfy and fall asleep almost immediately. I start dreaming, and I'm hearing this very loud sound. In my dream, it appears to be a large bull, just breathing fast and heavy. But I slowly start waking up, and I'm still hearing the noise. I glance across the room, and I can see my cousin by the lights of the TV, and his eyes are wide open. He looks terrified. The sound is coming right outside our door. Like I said, I had been asleep, so I wasn't fully awake and processing everything. So I just loudly said, "What the hell is that?" And the sound stops. With that, I just lay my head back down and try going back to sleep. But it must have finally all registered with me, because I woke up and asked my cousin if he had heard the sound too. He still looks scared out of his mind and nods, yes. I decide to take a peek out the window, but it's pitch black out and I can't see a thing. I contemplated going outside, but honestly just chickened out. So morning comes and I go outside. No sign of really anything strange. My aunt's in the kitchen and preparing breakfast as normal. That's when my cousin and his wife come over and ask if I had heard anything last night. I said it sounded like something was coming from outside our door, and they had heard it too, coming from the same direction, as that's when I noticed a broom leaning against a wall. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't hearing an animal. What I heard was the sound of a broom being swept incredibly fast. I know it sounds like a cliche fairy tale stuff with the broom, but the town is known for many women who are believed to be witches and practice all sorts of dark arts. I know many people would just say that it's probably a regular person trying to scare us, but as with every house in Mexico, our place is very well barricaded. So, unless someone could climb up flat walls, I don't see how any normal person could just come in and leave without making a sound going up our walls and our steel fence. Thankfully, the rest of my stay was uneventful, but I do regret not being awake enough to look outside when I heard it. I don't know what I would have seen, and I don't know if I want to know, but I'd rather not wait for it to happen again to answer those questions.
Back in my freshman year of high school in New Jersey, I was 15 years old. I had a very disturbing event happen to me, and I thought I'd share it with this community. Now, before getting into the details, I'd like to mention that my girlfriend at the time practiced Wicca and always read from old books. I really wasn't quite sure what it was, but I imagined it was some sort of witchcraft. I was kind of ignorant as to how powerful that stuff was, and always just brushed it off. Anyway, I would always walk my girlfriend home after school, and, like the gentleman that I am, I carried her backpack. This is a vital fact that will come into play later on in the story. My girlfriend at the time was in Navy ROTC, and she was supposed to go to physical training one day after school, but instead skipped PT, and we planned on going to my house to fool around. At the time, I was still a virgin, so I was eager to see if I would finally get lucky. Now, a few blocks away from our high school, and on the way to my house, there's an old cemetery. For some reason, she wanted me to go into the cemetery with her, and being the naive 15-year-old that I was, I stupidly agreed. She makes a beeline to a very specific grave, as if she already knew who she was there to visit. The grave didn't even have a tombstone, just a nameplate in the ground. It was very old, dating back to 1926, I believe. I still remember the name, and hope that by typing it here, nothing creepy happens. Her name was Ada Mae van Pelt. Anyway, she stops at this grave and asks me for her backpack. From her backpack, she pulls out a really old-looking book, a metal medieval-looking cup, and other old, weird objects, and placed them on top of this grave. She sits on the ground and starts reading from this book. I'm not sure what language it was, but it sounded like Latin or something ancient that I couldn't understand. Anyway, while she's reading in this cryptic language, I started noticing changes in the atmosphere. It got really dark and windy, as if a storm was coming in right over us, and I kid you not, a whole bunch of crows showed up out of nowhere and were hovering right over us. At this point, I'm scared shitless, and all I could let out was, "What are you doing?" To which she replied, "I'm evoking her powers. This was a very powerful witch, and I'm evoking her powers." So, between all this creepy stuff happening around us, and her telling me she was basically stealing powers from the grave of a dead witch, I told her I didn't feel comfortable, and that I would wait for her in front of the cemetery. I ran as fast as I could to the cemetery gate and just stood there, waiting for a few minutes, scared out of my mind. A few minutes later, she comes out of the cemetery and passes me her backpack and says, "Okay, let's go to your house." I don't ask her any more questions about what just happened because, frankly, I was too much of a chicken shit to think about it any longer. We start walking to my place, go inside my apartment, and walk straight to my bedroom. Now, at the time I lived in an apartment complex, and each building had 3 floors with stairs in the hallway connecting each floor. This is important to what happens later. Anyway, being the young hornball that I was, I completely disregarded everything that just happened at the cemetery, and the only thing on my mind is getting to second base and possibly hitting a home run. I put her backpack down on the floor, by my dresser, and we start kissing on the bed. We're kissing and feeling each other up for about a minute or so when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a huge black shadow shows up on my wall about 8 feet tall and really wide. But it had the form of a human or an animal. We both look at each other and she asks me, "Can you hear it? He's trying to speak to you?" But at the time, I couldn't hear anything. I could only see it, so I tell her that I can't hear anything. She then places her hands on my ears, one hand on each ear, and says, "Now you can hear." All of a sudden I can actually hear what this thing was saying, but not through my ears, if that makes any sense. It was more telepathic, if anything. Everything that it said was going straight into my mind, and I understood every word. I don't remember everything word for word, but basically, what this dark being was telling us was that we were young and didn't know what love was, or that we didn't know what we were getting into. He continued to tell us that he used to live in that same apartment, and one day he came home early from work and caught his wife cheating on him with another man. He snapped and chased her to the door with a knife, and ended up stabbing her multiple times, but she survived, and he later died in jail for that crime. At this point, my heart is beating at 1,000 beats per minute, and I'm very, very scared, but thank God, my mom comes knocking on the door to check up on us, and the dark shadow disappeared. All I can think of was to get out of that room, so we both go into my living room, and she confirms that she heard everything that I heard, word for word. We're both pretty shaken up, so we just stay in my living room watching TV until it's time for her to go home. We start getting ready for our walk, and for some reason, I can't find her backpack that I had left in my room earlier. We both look everywhere, and can't seem to find it anywhere in the apartment. I end up telling her that I'll more than likely find it later and I'll just bring it to school in the morning. Anyway, we walk out of my apartment, and right on the hallway stairs that go up to the 3rd floor is her backpack, open on the top stair with all its contents scattered all over the stairs. Her book, metal cup, etc. Creeped out, I help her pack everything up and walk her home. And it doesn't end there. I forgot to mention that at the time, my mother practiced Santeria. We're Cuban, and the majority of Cubans bring that religion with them. Thankfully, my mom left all that behind, and is now a devout Christian woman. When I get home, my mom and her friend are in the kitchen, and I overhear them talking about my girlfriend. It seemed like they were trying to figure out stuff about her through the Santeria. All of a sudden, my ex calls my house phone, and when I pick up, I hear her crying frantically. "Please tell her to stop. It hurts. It hurts. Tell her to stop, please." This was so creepy. It's like she could feel my mom and her friend using the Santeria to reveal things about her, and it was physically hurting her. So, we end up breaking up after this incident, and the years go by. We both graduate from high school, and we go many years without seeing each other. It seems like what they say is true, that when you practice witchcraft, it comes back to you, because recently I ran into her, and she's all messed up. She has some kind of disease where she's all swollen in the face and barely recognizable, and has many other health issues. I feel bad for her. We had a long conversation, and I brought up the incident above, and she remembers every single detail vividly, like I do. From the name on the grave to her backpack on the stairs with all her stuff thrown on the stairs. I know some of you might not believe anything about this story, but trust me, everything I just revealed is completely accurate and really happened.
In 2008, right after I graduated high school and moved away to college, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and in 2012, she unfortunately passed from the disease. Now, my mum was a huge believer in the paranormal, and swore her sister was a witch, and always told me stories of how her mother and her found voodoo dolls and creepy stuff in her sister's room. They never got along, and it always really upset my mum. She always said that if she doesn't care about her in life, then not to care about her in death. So when my mother died, and honestly being an arse, I didn't tell her sister or any of her sister's family. The first freaky part was when my mother was first diagnosed. As stated before, her sister did not call her once from my recollection, as they lived pretty far away. The day she was diagnosed, apparently her sister called her out the blue to catch up, and they went out for drinks, which made my mum feel better. I was told they did this about 3 times before abruptly ending it. I don't know the story, since I was 2 states away at college at the time. In 2011, my mother's cancer was taking its toll, so I moved back home and enrolled in a local college to finish. As soon as I moved back home, I never felt right. It always seemed very ominous, and since my mother was passing, I started suffering from anxiety and depression, so much that I dropped out of college and started to work full-time, which was the worst mistake of my life. In May of 2012, my mother succumbed to her illness and passed away. While discussing the funeral, we were discussing who should come. Like I said before, I remember my mother telling me all the terrible stuff her sister put her through. And for me, a lifetime of wrong does not give forgiveness by trying to catch up 4 times, then exiting out her life. So I barred her sister, never even telling her she'd passed. Her sister lived far away, and the obituary was only posted in the local paper. This is when stuff started to happen. 2 weeks after the funeral, her sister called, like 3 years of no contact. She asked to speak with my mother, and I told her everything what happened and how my mum felt, and how she felt so hurt that her only sister ignored and abandoned her for 30 years. It got quite real on the phone. No one said anything until her sister hung up the phone in silence. Since then, I believe she's put a serious curse on me and my family. 2 months after this incident, I was at my brother's house relaxing with him in the backyard. I got up to use the bathroom and went walking to the house and tripped in a random hole that seemed to just appear and broke my ankle severely in 3 different places requiring surgery. The recovery process for some reason took way longer and I lost my job over it. About a year later, healing, I struggled to find a place to hire me. Then to make matters worse, my father loses his job. To make matters even worse, he was diagnosed with cancer. I took every bit of savings that I had and took him to a hospital out of state. Thankfully, everything went well and he survived and everything felt peaceful while we were out of the house. When we got back, however, the endless bills and debt collectors arrived. I exhausted all my remaining funds for any type of decent future trying to save my house from being foreclosed. I had my car repossessed, sold almost all of my possessions, and through all of this, I tried to stay absolutely positive even though my world around me was collapsing. I was able to find work, but the struggles continued. But this only seemed to anger the curse even more. In 2016, while driving on the highway, of all places, with my father, our car suddenly shifted into neutral, making us almost get into a terrible accident with a semi. We took it to the garage while avoiding anything else, and took it toner, but even they had no idea what happened and couldn't fix it. When we did get a new car, it was riddled with and continues to be a money pit. Fast forward to 2017, my girlfriend thought I needed some time to relax and booked us a vacation to the Philippines to visit her family. While there, this black cloud seemed to follow me. We were in this hotel room getting ready to go out, and my girlfriend decides to take a shower because of the heat. While she was in there, the glass shower door exploded on her. Glass from head to toe, scratches and blood. I rushed her to the hospital, and while the glass barely missed her major veins, she ended up needing several stitches. We got back to the room, only to have the cops show up because the hotel wanted me to pay $8,000 for a shower door. Her relatives work for the media and somehow managed to get us out of this situation and flew us back right away. While home, my car insurance company somehow misplaced my payments and never told me, cancelled my insurance, and while driving to work, a cop pulls me over and asks to see the usual paperwork. He tells me to step out the car. I asked why, when another cop pulls up behind him, comes to my door and tells me the same thing. Very confused what's happening, he yanks the door open, forcibly pulls me out, throws me against my hood, and yells, "Stop resisting." I'm now crying because I'm terrified, and he continues to yell, "Why are you giving me attitude?" The other cop pulls him off me, and I avoid getting arrested but had my car towed for not having insurance. But that's just the start. After paying everything, getting my car back, just to find out my insurance company told the state, and the state cancelled my car's registration. Apparently this is a huge crime, and a sheriff came to my door to arrest me if I didn't pay another $800. I depleted my savings again to appease everyone, only to live in fear without watching my back. In 2019, throughout the whole year again, strange stuff happened. Small stuff like things disappearing and then reappearing a month later. Then around March, I break my toe. 2019 ended not being the greatest year by having a huge fight with my girlfriend. So 2020, let's see what you've got. But seriously, I am cursed. I know this for a fact. I'm pretty sure my mum's sister was a witch.
Thank you for watching this Mortis Media video. This has been Seth of Midnight Researcher. a channel formerly known as Frictional Weekly. Without going into the history of why my channel has changed so drastically, I invite anyone who's interested to check out my channel if they have an interest in varied horror content. I would like to thank everyone who's watched this video, and thank Mortis Media for letting me collab with him, and letting my friend Matthew Emmett do the same in the past. Stay tuned to Mortis Media for more great videos just like this one, and if you're interested, be sure to check out my own channel. This has been Seth, the Midnight Researcher, and I bid you all a farewell.